Friends, would you breathe with me? Let us inhale together and exhale together. Inhale love, exhale gratitude. Inhale love, exhale the rest. Amen. Anne Lamott, in her newest book, Almost Everything: Notes on Hope, writes, "I am stockpiling antibiotics for the apocalypse, even as I await the blossoming of paper whites on the windowsill in the kitchen. The news of late has captured the fever dream of modern life, everything exploding, burning, being shot or crashing to the ground all around us, while growing older has provided me with a measure of perspective and equilibrium and a lovely long-term romance. Towns and cities, ice fields, democracy, people, all disappear while we rejoice and thrive in the spring and the sweetness of old friendships." End times and good times. On this Sunday following Thanksgiving, we hear of everything crashing to the ground. But thanks to Lamont, we also hear of the sweetness of friendships, the joy of blossoming gratitude. So on this Reign of Christ Sunday, this Gratitude Day, we come ready to say thank you for sweetness. We also come ready to watch for signs of the kingdom of God, the reign of God's dream for all of creation. But we begin at the end. End times. For our reading from the Gospel of Mark seems to show us Jesus somewhere in the late 1980s, yellow song Walkman wearing in his ears, grooving to some folk pop rock. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. Thank you, R.E.M. Can't get enough references to R.E.M. at this church. Jesus sings, "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and there will be famines." It's the end of the world as we know it. Not sure how many of you may have uttered or heard uttered similar lyrics over this past Thanksgiving holiday, the tabled past few days. I know I heard them coming from my lips at times. For yes, stockpiling antibiotics and Lamont, the news as of late has captured the fever dream of modern life, everything exploding, burning, being shot, or crashing to the ground all around us. 2018 has been rough. I don't think we need to go down the list just alone in California, from Paradise Lost in fires to the tasing death of another unarmed black man, Sinead Valentina Kobe, last month by police officers. By not passing over such things lightly, we might still strain our eyes to see paper whites blossoming. We might strain our eyes to see life-giving emergence of relationships while things seem to fall apart around us. We might still have eyes to see. I do pray that these past few days for all of you have been infused with some moments of gratitude, of being with friends, maybe new strangers, maybe even in the sacred company of yourself. And I pray that there were chances to utter that deep prayer of thank you. And even if that deep word came in solidarity with those who consider Thanksgiving to actually be a national day of mourning, inspired by the indigenous communities here in Massachusetts. I saw a New York Times political cartoon yesterday that had a picture of the Mayflower sailing across the Atlantic with the caption, "Migrant Caravan." And I said, thank you. Friends, might flowers be blossoming? Might there be truths right under the surface for us to taste as we turn to our faith? Last Sunday, we heard how Jesus noticed some truths just below the surface. We noticed that he noticed someone that others did not, the widow who came to the treasury with her 2 mites. Jesus noticed the profound injustice underlying her story. Recall how Jesus was at the end of his nearly 2 chapters long teaching in the temple at Jerusalem, as told in Mark's Gospel. And recall how he was not just teaching, but provoking others to the ways of love and good deeds, as the refrain goes in Hebrews. But before he leaves the temple, he notices this unnamed widow who comes to the treasury, a woman who is bound by society's structural sins of economic inequality. Jesus notices her and publicly points out the tragic unfairness of her reality. See how she puts everything she has to live on. Jesus observes, laments, and provokes the idea for all of us that sacrificial giving should not be sanctioned by any faith institution or religious structure, but actively pushed against, while lifting up the ways of generosity for those who can give. The spirit of provocation continues into today's reading, as Tom so well read this morning. Thank you, Tom, from chapter 13. Jesus again topples expectations. Upon leaving the temple, one of his disciples makes the seemingly innocuous comment, "Wow, look, Jesus, check out those large and impressive stones of the temple. They're so beautiful. They're huge. They're just massive." And perhaps this is just small talk, but perhaps more likely it's a voice that represents a voice that so many others do, that link power and progress with size, structures, and walls. That which is huge, that which is looming, has standing and merit, perhaps inherent worth. So the story goes. Our current American landscape is strewn these days with bigger and richer is better ideologies. But of course, the temple at Jerusalem at the time of Jesus was incredibly impressive, to say the least, with white marbled courtyard walls, massive stone columns lining the perimeter, holding up the canopied porches, and walls covered with brilliantly bright sheets of gold. This literally understood earthly house for God most certainly did wow. Josephus, the great historian, wrote that the gold on the temple reflected so fierce a blaze of fire that those who tried to look at it were forced to turn away. It seemed in the distance like a mountain covered in snow, for any part not covered in gold was dazzling white. But to all of this, Jesus replies, "Do you see these great buildings?" Jesus had just emerged from this very dazzling structure with stones that his disciples in our world are swayed by. But in contrast with what Jesus is dazzled by, the contrast is profound. For Jesus notices the impressive, beautifully sculpted, mighty rock of the widow who courageously entered the sanctuary with 2 mites in hand and fierce courage in her heart. She, the survivor of the state, she, the one in bondage to religiously sanctioned poverty, she, the one Jesus notices and is dazzled by. Do you see these great buildings? I see this great woman. I see widows and orphans. I see the poor. I see disenfranchised. I see those the world misunderstands as weak. I see their strength, their courage, their truth, and their love. Are you moved only by architectural displays of power? Jesus asks. I am moved by injustice. Do you see the false structures of domination constructed out of fear and held together with the mortar of the sins of white supremacy, American nationalism, and fossil fuel-driven greed? I see the truth that Black Lives Matter and immigrants and refugees are to be honored and loved, not vilified. Are you impressed with rich people who rise to power by demeaning and abusing others? I am impressed with those who refuse to be cast aside, those who rise from the ashes, those who rise out of love. Do you see these great buildings? They will come crashing down, Jesus promises. Not one stone will be left on another stone. All will be thrown down. There is fire in Jesus' tongue. I think there is also compassion in his tongue. He's, of course, speaking of the unthinkable, the destruction of that dazzling temple in Jerusalem, the destruction of the very epicenter of religious life, cultural identity for his people. The first readers of Mark's Gospel would, of course, know exactly what event was being spoken about here, for in 70 CE, right around the time that Mark's Gospel had been written, the temple had been destroyed. The historical event that came to be described as the desolating abomination came to pass for the Jewish people, for the Roman army under Emperor Vespasian and Commander Titus crushed any Jewish resistance, sacked Jerusalem, and destroyed and desecrated this, the Second Temple. Certainly those who survived this thought it's most certainly the end of the world as we know it, and we don't feel fine. All is not well in the world. And in many ways the world had come to an end, for that temple was the place where they gathered and the place they were informed by the stories of God in the world. But I imagine that the early Christ followers who had just heard the emergence of these words from Mark's gospel, just in the wake of the temple's actual destruction, would have been captivated to hear Jesus' words on all of this. This chapter 13, known as the Little Apocalypse, goes on for more verses than we read today and talks of all sorts of pain and suffering beyond the famines and the earthquakes. In the apocalyptic literature style, not uncommon at the time, Mark uses many of the images taken from other parts of the Hebrew Bible, like Daniel, to tell a story of pain, personally and communally. Jesus takes up those words. You will be beat in sanctuaries, you will be hated, put on trial, and some of you will be killed. He does not mince words. But those who first heard those words again hear their very story. They hear Jesus validating their experience of how the world is. They do not hear predictions of the end of the world, they hear descriptions of their actual here and now world. Their world was on fire. The temple had been destroyed, but they kept gathering together, wondering what it was to be the emergent Jewish community following this new Rabbi Jesus, the resurrected one. Things were falling apart. Their world was coming to an end, but they hear these words, and in them they hear encouragement. Do not be alarmed when these things happen, Jesus says. Do not be distracted by the false prophets who tell you to give up hope, who lead you astray, but instead watch for me. The very last word in Mark's 13th chapter is watch. Yes, the sanctuaries you've come to trust in, the familiar places where you've encountered God in the past are vanishing, but God is not. Watch, God is coming in a new form. God is coming as the human one, and it is through encounter with this human one where your future hope lies. Not in the impermanence of constructed things, but in the shining hope of the human one, the incarnated one. So an active watch and search for Christ in creation will sustain you while you go through the trials and tribulations that surely will come. So how do we watch, friends, here in 2018 for this new form of God? Listen for the birth pangs, Jesus says, the labor pains. Listen for something is being born in your midst. Something is being brought to life. As we look around post-Thanksgiving 2018 and we see the fires that burn, the caravans that are climate displaced, beloved people, the deportations, the surging hate crimes, etc., etc., etc. As we see these seemingly end times, might Jesus be asking us to take a moment and to listen in a new way for birth pangs? Might we hear something out of that silence emerging, something new out of the chaos? What does the midwife call to be done at the time of birth? Breathe and push. As the labor pains come, breathe and push. I take this phrase from Valerie Kaur, who uses it to speak passionately about the movement that she has founded called the Revolutionary Love Project. Valerie Kaur is a social justice activist, lawyer, filmmaker, innovator, mother, and Sikh American who's leader of this project, the Revolutionary Love Project, which is a movement which envisions the world and a world where love is a public ethic and a shared practice in our lives and in our politics. I've been deeply inspired by the work of Valerie and the Revolutionary Love Project, which emerged in 2016, just before the elections. Valerie is actually an honored Harvard Divinity School graduate. She was given the Peter J. Gomes Memorial Honors Award, the highest award for alumni, a year or two ago. Valerie tells a story about her own labor story when she gave birth to her son. During the deep pains and contractions, at the point where she truly felt she could not give any more into that pain, It was her mother by her side who whispered a prayer from their shared sick faith into her ear that translates as, "The hot winds cannot touch you. You are brave. You are brave." It was through this experience that she began to understand the power of revolutionary love. She explains in an excellent TED Talk, which I've posted to our Facebook site, love is more than a rush of feeling that comes to us if we are lucky. Love is sweet labor, fierce, bloody, imperfect, ongoing, life-giving. Love is a choice we make over and over again. Valerie goes on, in this era of enormous rage where the fires burn all around us, I believe revolutionary love is the call of our times. She reminds us that pain is overwhelming. When that pain overwhelms us, we are simply asked to breathe, to take a breath. Something that may seem trite, simple, thoughtless, or automatic for many of us. The truth is, most of us do not breathe enough. Health professionals, yoga instructors, gurus, therapists, and healers continually remind Americans of how shockingly poorly we breathe. We breathe too shallow. Elizabeth Peyton Jones, author of Cook Yourself Young, explains how deeper breathing gives us more oxygen, more energy increases as a result. Our neck and shoulders relax, posture improves, as does digestion. It seems like a no-brainer for us to breathe more deeply. And I would add, breathing deeply improves our spiritual life, our focus, our meditation, our prayers. To better love ourselves so that we can love others and God, we need to breathe. We also need to push. Like our own tradition, the Revolutionary Love Project believes in the power of showing up in solidarity at times when injustice burns. Following the Tree of Life massacre just recently in Pittsburgh, Valerie encouraged all of us to first grieve and when possible to begin to breathe, and then when the time is right to organize and push. Push for policies that will clamp down on access to guns, push on policies that call out all acts of anti-Semitism, push to help bring more love to the table in the public sphere, to talk across difference, to emerge as emergent people across the aisle. I love that we as a church joined in solidarity on that first Shabbat following that tragedy in Pittsburgh in handfuls of synagogues sprinkled around greater Boston on that Friday night. I love that we'll have another chance to do so here at Central Reformed Temple this coming Sunday as they begin their Hanukkah season, a Light Through the Ages season. And I love that we as a church do not just push in the social justice realm, but on the personal level. I love that some of you invited and extended your table over this past Thanksgiving week. I love that part of your own DNA is the question, who might be neglected or ignored this season that I need to make a phone call and invite to join me this year. I love that many of you write cards and make visits unannounced, announced through Kay Olm to Elsa and Riney up in New Hampshire. It's part of who you are as a congregation. I love that a regular thought in this place is that my pain is someone else's pain. That we here in this place celebrate that one person's joy is the collective joy. We celebrate, we share concerns on a regular basis. Valerie Kaur believes that the practice of collective joy is the practice of moral resistance in these days. She said that while King and Gandhi and Mandela were incredible prophetic voices in the ways of loving others, they weren't often that good at the revolutionary love of self. And she claims this is a recent feminist intervention, thanks be to God, calling us into the ways of self-love, taking time to breathe, noticing the blossoming of flowers of friendship, things that are emerging in the midst of difficult times. And of course, the love of others as our world is wounded. Valerie calls us to tend to each other's wounds. We can't heal each other's wounds. That has to be the Spirit infused in our work together and the work of our self-love collectively. But we are to tend to each other's wounds as best we are able. Presbyterian Church in Warwick, Rhode Island is acutely aware of such wounds this past weekend as this morning they are worshiping for the first time after their sanctuary burned to the ground on Thanksgiving Eve. Our friend and beloved stated clerk of the Presbytery of Boston, Reverend T.J. DeMarco, is their newly installed pastor there at Woodbury Union Church in Warwick. And all this took place just this past Wednesday, only after his first full month in ministry with that community, and only after a few weeks where his beloved wife breathed and pushed life into the world and pushed their second child into the world. A lot has been happening in their lives, but it's been moving, so moving to see TJ's response and his family's response and their congregation's response in the midst of this, to see other churches in Warwick, the interfaith community, the presbytery, the synod, and other places of faith and intention coming and circling around this church. St. Benedict Catholic Church, different theology for sure than what is professed in that Presbyterian church, opened up their doors this morning, and they are allowing them to worship for as long as they need to in their space. Sunday morning, prime time in their sanctuary, model to the rest of our world for sure. What's deeply moving to me is not just how people have responded to that church, but how they have responded. They put out a strong message over social media this week saying, as our church faces its biggest trial, we remember that Woodbury is more than the building that houses it, and its foundation is built on something stronger than mortar and stone. The church and its congregation continue to worship, love, and outreach in order to serve the surrounding community. We may be without a building, but we are not without our mission to serve God and to help those in need. In fact, they made it clear that they are continuing to collect clothing for this clothing drive that they've been collecting for the past few weeks, and someone is standing outside of the burned building this morning to collect that clothing to give to others. In their own need, they continue to look and serve the needs of others. I love one of Valerie Kaur's profound questions to our world today. What if this darkness is not of the tomb, but of the womb? Church, do we believe this? It certainly echoes true to our Easter refrain of Alleluia, Christ is risen indeed. If this is indeed a moment where new things are being born, we are to breathe and push. If people out of their misguided motivations tear down again and again our signs out front, our Black Lives Matter signs, our immigrants and refugees welcome here signs, we will continue to put them up. They will fly through Advent outside of our buildings. Friends, we will continue to push and breathe in our own lives. Breathe self-love. Hear that God is present in your life and calling you to love yourself so that you can love others. May we breathe and push this coming Advent season, dear church. May we imagine the womb and not the tomb. May we envision the blossoming of life that God has in store for us. And may we conspire together. Thank you again, Reverend Barbara Brown Taylor. It reminds us that the word conspire comes from that Latin root, to breathe together. I remember closing that sermon after the first Sunday after the marathon bombing in 2013 here in our neighborhood with these words. They seem relevant to us again today. May the very idea that God is with us in our suffering become a conspiracy that gets humans to breathe, work, worship, and live together. May this be our invitation as people of faith in the city of Boston and the wider world to conspire together to tell a different narrative to our world, not one of violence, profiling, or revenge, but one of selfless love, compassion, and hope. A narrative of a stream whose river makes glad the city of God, a narrative of a God who speaks peace to her people, a narrative of a life that flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation, a narrative of no more hurting people. And I would add a narrative that the hot winds cannot touch you. You are brave. You are brave. Amen.